our third artwork, and this is a different way that a contemporary artist has taken a historical document. In this case, it's a photograph, and altered it to say something relevant about our lives today. So for this artwork, if you could just kind of look at the work as a whole for a few seconds, and then we're going to focus on kind of what's happening in each panel from left to right. Okay. So let's start with the panel on the left. If you could type in the chat box what seems to be going on in the, if we're dividing this into 3 sections, what's going on in the section all the way over to the left? What do you think we see? Yeah, okay. So part of the civil rights movement, funeral procession, maybe Martin Luther King Jr. Okay. Right, and it's a photograph. Right, a crowd of people moving through the street, a big funeral, absolutely. Very good. Okay, so now let's move to the second panel, the middle panel. What seems to be happening there now? So we're noticing the dots, we're noticing the color of the dots. We've got black dots, perhaps they're equaling faces. The heads are represented as dots. So data points, right, not a human crowd. And then the photo is opaque, right? So the photo is, it's like obscured in a lot of ways. We can still make it out a little bit, but certain people are being kind of singled out, right? The dots make a shape of their own too, right? Right, absolutely. Okay, and now let's move to the third panel. What do we see happening there? Ah, okay, so we're noticing we've got dots, but the color of the dots has changed, and so there's a guess that the red dots are the white folks. Certain people, right? So maybe females. So we're starting to think about who do we connect to those red dots? Smaller dots, there are fewer of them, absolutely. So it's a group that is less represented here. Very good. Okay, and so you're absolutely right. This the title of this artwork is Life Magazine, April 19th, 1968, to the full title. And the artist's name is Alfredo Jar. He's a Chilean-born artist who came to the United States in 1982. And when he moved to the United States in 1982, he was really troubled to discover that racial tensions still ran as high as they did so long after the civil rights movement. And so when Alfredo Jar was working on research for one of his other works, he came across this iconic photograph that's on the left panel that was in the April 19th issue of Life magazine of Dr. King's funeral procession. And he was just struck by the lack of white people in the photograph. And so he chose to highlight that, to highlight the disparity between the number of black and white mourners by using the second and the third panel in the way that he did. So he made this work in 1995, and you know, the 1990s were, there were a lot of racial tensions. There's still racial tensions today, obviously, but in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, you had the Rodney King beating, the subsequent trial, and the acquittal of the police officers who were involved, the LA riots, the O.J. Simpson trial. So that was all happening around the time that the artist created this work. And we actually had Alfredo Jar at the museum just a few weeks ago, because right now we're remembering the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King. So it's one of those artworks that really can put into conversation different time periods, 1968, 1995, and today. So is there anything else you'd like to add in the chat box about some of the stylistic choices that Alfredo Jar made here? I've mentioned the colors and the dots.
just add what the technique that Alfredo Jar is using here is what we call appropriation, which is, you find that in a lot of modern and contemporary art where artists are taking other artworks or photographs or materials that already exist in the world and manipulating them in some way to send a new message. So that's sort of what he's done here with this original photograph that he didn't take.
Marissa's mentioning more layers. We should have called, Phoebe, we should have called this webinar
Layers.
Many Layers.
Yes.
The photo shows the emotion and the faces of the individuals, and then it kind of becomes these like data points. Yeah, it's an interesting choice. He chose to use a triptych. If you were at the last webinar, we talked, no, that wasn't this webinar. It was a separate webinar, another audience, but you know, as you know, if you're familiar with art history, a triptych is a traditional format for Christian altarpieces. So part of that was to sort of underscore you know, the ways in which Dr. King is considered to be a martyr. And so while the artist began with a photograph that was not his own, he makes it his own through all the different choices that he makes here. So for the sake of time, we're going to move on to our fourth and final artwork for today. And we began by looking at a painting by McLean Thomas. Then we looked at that sort of mixed media collage by Mark Bradford. Here we have a manipulated photograph. And so finally, we're going to be looking at an installation.
Yeah, and we're going to start with a close-up, and then we're going to zoom out to show you the whole thing. So let's just start by taking a look. This is a close-up view of this installation. And just share in the chat box again your first impressions. What do you see, and what does it make you think about? Marbles, row. So, right. Okay, marbles on a wood floor. Water bubbles, interesting.
Someone lost their marbles.
Yeah. I like that. Okay, so we've got these sort of spherical objects, dots of glue. Okay. Yeah, so maybe we're seeing that the marbles are secured to the floor by glue. Marbles in a line, but they're not all in a straight line, are they? So there's patterns. Cool, smooth, but bumpy surface. Okay. Close-up of a larger design, like veins. I like that comparison. So let's zoom out and show you the larger whole room view. So now that you can see the whole room that this piece is installed in, what do you have to add? What is new that strikes you, or do you have revisions to your original thoughts? Cracks, breaks in foundation, crumbling emotions, water. Okay, marble veins.
Sci-fi story starter.
Interesting. So a couple people saying water or plants. We were getting this idea that it's natural elements, vines growing up the wall. A question about how did the artist create this? And so we'll talk a little bit about that, or you get to see her actually in a video. Great. So I think we'll share the title of this piece and add a little more information. So this is a piece by Maya Lin. It's called Folding the Chesapeake, and it was done in 2015. This piece was commissioned specifically for a show at our Renwick Gallery, which we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. It's our museum dedicated to contemporary American craft. And Maya Lin is an artist that you may have heard of. She's best known for her design for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in DC. She was only 21 years old when she got that commission back in 1982, which is pretty incredible. She was, a college student at Yale, I believe. And now the design was pretty controversial at the time. Now it's, pretty beloved by many people who visit in DC. Let's go back, or forward rather, take a look at the installation again. So now Myelin, this is a few decades later, and she is creating this work. Several of you thought that the marbles reminded you of water, and indeed she is referencing the Chesapeake watershed with this installation. So we'll show you, this is an aerial view of the installation on the left, and then you can see on the right, this is a map of the Chesapeake Bay. So for those of you who maybe haven't been to the DC region, the Chesapeake Bay is a major waterway in our area. It's home to over 250 fish species and over 300 migratory bird species. It's the largest estuary in the United States. And it's currently facing several threats, including deforestation, loss of wildlife, poor water quality, and rising sea levels. So many of the communities in this region are dependent on the resources that the Chesapeake provides. But, you know, we don't often look at it as a whole in this way. And what Myelin is trying to do with this installation, you can see on the left there, you can sort of see where DC and Baltimore would lie. So the Chesapeake is so much larger than the part that we often see. You know, if you live in a city, you're familiar with your little piece of the waterway, but we don't often think about how large it truly is. So we'll just share a couple of quotes.
And actually, before we do the quotes, we have a short interview with Myelin while she was doing the installation. So you'll see her there sitting on the floor with the glue gun, talking a little bit more about what she's doing in this work.
Hi, I'm Myelin. I installed a piece folding the Chesapeake in the Renwick Gallery. I have been trying to find a certain type of marble for exactly this for 10 years. I think they're kind of slightly flawed, and I love them for their flaws. When I was a kid, my dad was Dean of Fine Arts, and he invited all these glass blowers, and they used a certain type of glass bead. This is the marble from my childhood. It's the color, it's the size, and I think I just blurted out, I would do this piece about water because a lot of them are like they're almost cartographic in nature. I love making people very aware of what's literally below their feet or in their backyard. So of course the Chesapeake Bay, as an artist, it's a beautiful drawing. I think there's something so magical about waterways, and that we don't tend to look at them as singular wholes. We tend to look at where we know upon that river. But the minute you step back and you will see these incredible living systems as an object, as a singularity, and it begins to take on its own personality, and maybe people begin to think of it as this very holistic system. And of course, waterways are just that.
So now we're just going to share a couple of quotes. Oh, and I just wanted to read those responses to the video. So the marbles are bigger than you thought, the way they catch the light. So the videos are such a great tool for showing things like that, because you really can't convey all of that from a photograph. So just to share these two quotes, the first by Myelin herself, the artist. She said, "This piece allows me to give people an idea of the totality of the bay. You see it as a single organism, as a living system." And then the second from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, to understand how the bay works, protect it, and restore its health, we must have a sense of the whole system and how its pieces fit together geographically. So you can see how Myelin is really trying to sort of inform people and educate them and get them to think about this natural feature that they may have seen part of as get them to sort of think about it as a whole and think about its importance. So if you just think for a minute, obviously you are in Montana, you're not on the Chesapeake Bay, but what are some natural resources or waterways in your region that are important to people in Montana? Okay, so we've got the Yellowstone River, Missouri River, Yellowstone River in my backyard. That's awesome. Headwaters of the Missouri, glaciers. Awesome. The Sun River, Fort Peck Dam, 10 Mile Creek. Great. So you can think about how the Stillwater River, so how your students might engage with those features that are important to you in Montana, in a way that could be interdisciplinary. Could they create an art project like Maya Lin? Could they do a piece of writing? Or, how could you get your students to think sort of holistically about the importance of these natural features to your region? And how might they educate others about its importance? So I think this piece is just such a lovely jumping off point for, thinking about our world. I like that idea. So you can tie fishing into your project. That would be a way to engage your students. That's awesome.
Okay, so we have just a few minutes left, and we're on our wrap-up slide. So we have a few final questions to pose to everyone, but I want to make sure before we do that we share the URL to the Learning Lab.
Yes.
So I will, here it is, and I'm going to put it in the chat box.
If anyone wants to learn more about the Learning Lab and you missed our last webinar, you should go watch the recording because we did a tutorial of how this website works.
But so Phoebe, they can find all the artworks we talked about, the videos, and some additional resources as well? Okay.
Yep. There's an interview that includes Alfredo Jar as well as 2 other artists. There's a Washington Post article about that piece, the Life magazine piece, and there's a link to another Learning Lab collection that I created about Micheline Thomas and her process.
And when Alfredo Jar was here about 2 weeks ago for an artist panel on Dr. King, the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, we were able to do an artist interview with him in the gallery in front of his work, like you saw with Mark Bradford and Micheline Thomas. We just shot it, so we're currently editing it, but once that video is live online, then Phoebe can add it to this Learning Lab collection so that you can hear more from Alfredo Jar as well. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left together, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on either some of the themes that, we looked at 4 very different examples of how contemporary artists use various media and visual tools to convey a message or to engage the public with questions. So we'd love to hear, which of the themes that these different artworks bring up resonate with something that you're already doing in your classroom, or you would like to incorporate into your classroom, or what it was like to kind of hear from the artists themselves. How did hearing their voices affect your experiences with the artworks? So go ahead and share any thoughts on those questions or any final thoughts in the chat box. Okay. So liking our the Project Zero thinking routine of covering up the parts and zooming in, sort of taking it one section at a time, and then elaborating in as much descriptive language as you can.
And that's something that you can really be creative with when you're using artworks in the classroom and reproduction. You can do things like that we can't exactly do when we're teaching in front of the artworks in the museum.
Right, helped cure my curiosity. I can't tell you how many times I just wish I could ask the artist
Yes.
this question, and part of my job now is I get to just ask the artist those questions and then turn them into videos so that we can share them.
So you've got a whole bunch of thoughts
Oh,
here.
you got a bunch of them. Let's jump back. Let's see.
The covering up parts of the thing, parts of the object could work for a math classroom. I love that.
I love the idea of that. So, right, I love how you're connecting the water politics to something that's very relevant to your state. Right. Oh, interesting. Okay, so the idea of the artist interviews may help pull them in, kind of bring the artwork to life a little bit in a couple of different ways.
Sometimes it can demystify it to hear the artist actually speaking about it.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, that takes us really to the end of our time. So thank you for joining us. It's been such a pleasure to be hosting these webinars with you over the last few months. So feel free to leave any final comments or questions in the chat box. But that is the end of the webinar. And so I know you have places you need to get off to this evening. Thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yes, thank you so much. All right.
Well, you are very welcome. It was our pleasure. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, everyone. Oh, thank you very much.